Broadcasting from the Business RadioX studios in Atlanta, it's time for Executive Perspective. Executive Perspective is brought to you by Cressa, going beyond space to foster the best environment for every business. Now, here's your host, Danny Vandermeeten.
Hello and welcome to Executive Perspective, a podcast series brought to you by Cressa, the world's largest commercial real estate firm dedicated to representing companies who need real estate to operate. At Cressa, we understand the value of relationships and the power of connecting with others in the business world, and that's why we love this podcast series, where we get to sit down with executives and business leaders, listen to their challenges, insights, and unique perspectives. My name is Danny Vandermeeten, and I'm a Vice President of Tenant Advisory Services in the Atlanta office of Cressa, and I'm the host of Executive Perspective. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Chris Lindenau. Chris, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Danny. Thanks for having me here.
And so you are the Chief Executive Officer of officially, today, as it's been released, the fastest growing company in the state of Georgia, according to the Inc. 500?
5,000.
5,000. Yeah. Congratulations. That is awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And we'll get a lot to that. But first, we like to start out just giving a little bit more background about you. So you graduated from Georgia Tech here in Atlanta. Go Jackets. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this would really appreciate that about you. And right after graduating, it looks like you spent 5 years in the U.S. Navy. And then after that service, you were in the security and in the video technology business for a couple of years. And just 5 years ago started Fusus. And that's something in and of itself. 5 years ago, now you're number one in Georgia. And along the way, 5 kids, ages 5 to 14. How do you get it all done?
Well, first off, that's a lot of, as I'm hearing you tell that story, I realize how many fives are involved in that narrative.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, I seem to do things in fives. We actually, believe it or not, we started the company in 2019. So I think it's actually 4 years.
Okay.
And you know, in terms of the Inc. 5,000 announcement, I mean, I'm humbled by that, of course, but the real credit goes to the team, and the team is right. Now the 100+ employees that work at Fusus that, they're just bought in. They're bought into the mission, and that is to help communities by working with law enforcement to make those technologies that they have interoperable within those communities. And so, I'm really more the ambassador, if you will, of a vision that is shared by a lot of dedicated people who have executed on that vision.
It does take a village. It
certainly
does.
Yeah.
But don't underestimate the fact it took a couple of scrappy guys and a fold-out white table to start the dream. That is incredible and so timely that just got released this morning and you get to come on here. So for people that are listening that have never heard of Fusus or are not even familiar with law enforcement technology, right. If it were me trying to describe, well, what does Chris do and what does this company do, I'd say you guys integrate different security and surveillance assets for law enforcement and different public safety organizations. What more would you add to that in your elevator pitch? And it doesn't have to be an elevator pitch, but tell us a little bit about what you guys do.
I mean, something we all understand is a 911 call, right? Like, things with law enforcement typically start with a 911 call. So you think about that's a system that somebody has a login to and then shares information from that login to, ostensibly officers who are responding. Traditionally in law enforcement agencies, you also have camera systems, typically called video management software systems. You have, alarm type systems. So you may have, fire alarms, burglar alarms that they respond to, with the fire department and the police department, respectively. You have technologies like gunshot alerting systems. Specifically, you see those a lot in urban areas. Mm-hmm. So as I kind of go down the list, the things that I've just rattled off are examples of different software systems that operate primarily independently, where an officer or officers are trained on using those systems. And really, prior to Fusus, there was nobody looking at kind of the landscape of all those technologies and saying, well, hold on, if we could get the gunshot system to work with the video management software system, to work with the 911 dispatch system, to share that information automatically to the assigned officer, wouldn't that be helpful? And as I started to kind of ask agencies their opinion on this, there was a resounding absolutely. Right now we've got 10 people to manage 10 systems. that are heavily fragmented. And so I guess to answer your question most specifically, it was really kind of looking at what's already out there and making it work collectively more effectively than it did independently. That old kind of 1 + 1 = 3 scenario.
And a lot of that is allowing these different organizations to share what you just described with technologies and cameras and systems. Do those fall into that bucket of what we refer to, and in your industry, the vernacular of surveillance assets? Is that technically what falls into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're referring to is like kind of what the community has to share in. And yes, I mean, it's interesting, last year, and it depends on what data source you go to, but the commercial security market was an $8 billion market in the United States. In other words,
for products and services.
Well, primarily for technologies. And so like if you look at what businesses are spending, it's in the billions of dollars a year. But when you ask how many of those businesses connect in real time to law enforcement, very few. So here we spend a massive amount of money with law enforcement on their technologies. We, as a society, spend a massive amount of money in the commercial security market, and yet never the two shall meet. Right? It's just like nobody was thinking about, well, like how do we get them connected up, because they have a shared mission, right? Safety, security of employees. If you're a director of security for a business, is very similar to the mission of a chief of police, which is safety and security of the citizens, which include employees from the businesses. So it's a congruent mission, but there was never any congruent component of the technology. And that's where Fusus steps in, is we not only make the law enforcement stuff work better together, but we also make the community assets that they've invested billions in work better with those law enforcement assets. And
I want to touch on that too, because Fusus, like where you got the name for this company, what it means is fusing these products together, even though they're owned by what you're describing, correct me if I'm wrong, public and private organizations. You're allowing these different products and services and technologies to fuse to one another to facilitate the goals of everybody that's fused. Is that an accurate way to describe that?
It's right. And if you actually look at the Greek etymology of the word fusus, was the spindle, and the spindle was the tool that brought disparate fibers into one unified fiber, in essence, fusing them together. And so
clever name.
Yes. That's why we kind of came up with that as our icon and the name of the company. And, candidly, it was also a short name, which was somewhat easy to write and pronounce. At least we thought. Though we've learned since then that, we get a lot of Fusus and, and we get a little derivation. So maybe we need to do a better job of the pronunciation side of things. But
if they're asking how to pronunciate it, at least they're trying. At least they're listening.
That's right. At least you're leaving an impression, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the silver lining. So when I think of what you guys do, what did Fusus do that was special or unique when you approached integrating these technologies, and how are you doing it differently than maybe some other organizations are doing it? And how has your approach contributed to your success? Yeah, I mean, I think to summarize, succinctly, I would just say it's an open approach. Prior to Fusus and even after Fusus, there was this growing interest with law enforcement to unify their assets. And some very highly lauded police departments like NYPD had established centers for doing this sort of thing. And they called theirs in New York, the Real-Time Crime Center. We built upon that and we said, well, this is a real-time crime center for all technologies, for all agencies. And there's, 12,500 state and local agencies that could potentially benefit from this. And so the approach that we took that was slightly different was that instead of building just a real-time crime center platform that worked with our own companies' manufactured cameras and our own companies' manufactured license plate readers and our own companies' manufactured gunshot systems, we actually looked at the landscape of the best of breed technologies across multiple vendors. Companies like Axis Communications or Bosch or Avigilon, who are building, best of breed cameras, or companies like Flock Safety or Vigilant or Genetec that were building best of breed license plate readers. And we said, well, why should an agency have to just pick one vendor? Why can't they benefit from the best of breed and the innovation of all of these vendors who have a vested interest in earning those agencies' business
But at the same time, the agency wants to continue to have the best of breed technology and not be kind of beholden to one silo, if you will, from one vendor. And so that concept, that notion of being open, believe it or not, was new. I mean, Fusus was the first company to say, you pick, Mrs. Customer, Mr. Customer, what you want, and we will integrate it into your common operating picture. That unified single pane of glass will continue to evolve as your needs evolve, as technology evolves, and you'll not be kind of shoehorned into this notion of like planned obsolescence with one vendor who's going to come to you in 2 years and say, well, in order to keep your system up to date, you gotta upgrade to our latest siloed version of, the solution that you bought a couple years ago. And so it was a liberating thing as much as it was keeping them, meaning agencies, on the cusp of the latest and greatest innovations. And that was unique.
And is the philosophy that kind of serves that effort? Is it that if I'm the Marietta Police Department, and if I'm Truist Park, regardless of whatever technologies I'm using, our end goal is the same. We want safety. And so our technologies and assets should be able to work with one another. To your example, you shouldn't just be beholden to using products that only mesh with one another.
Yeah, I like the way you're saying that, because that's, at my core, I'm a prior military officer, and I've carried a lot of that kind of ethos with me through my private sector career. It's a mission-oriented focus, right? You're talking about the mission. The mission is for law enforcement to help communities, to preserve safety and security in communities. The best way to do that is leverage the best that technology has to offer.
Right.
The best way to do that is an open system.
Right. And
that's what we offer, and we'll continue to offer that.
So what sort of innovations are interesting to you personally? And essentially where I'm going with this is, where do you intend to take the technology beyond where it's even at today?
Well, there's so many interesting things going on, just in terms of technology as a whole. AI is at the forefront of a lot of conversations.
Sure is.
We started, with object classification AI. We had a team of data scientists, building some really neat object classification technology. And then we kind of, as we started to make, for lack of a better term, unsmart cameras smart, by bringing in, third-party systems and then layering in artificial intelligence. As we started to see the impact of that in solving crime in communities, then we pushed the envelope, and more recently we launched something called behavioral AI, which is now you're looking at, a condition upon which an alert might be given. So a prime example of something we do is wrong way traffic, right? So like cameras facing intersections, not uncommon. Cameras facing intersections that can pick up a car that's potentially en route to a head-on collision. Now that's unique. Yeah. That's called behavioral AI. So we've launched that, and really excited about what that portends for our customers. A logical next step for us to consider, and obviously on the tip of everyone's tongue right now, is generative AI. And what does that portend for, allowing systems to make decisions about, based on machine learning and the availability of information that's out on the internet, and kind of pulling that data and culling that data and making more informed decisions, through generative AI technology is exciting, especially when you think about, what that means in terms of bringing disparate data sets together and then collectively doing really complex computations and spitting out, as a result, very good actions, very efficient actions that will lend insights to officers in the field. It's almost kind of the proverbial autopilot of, decision making now. And you're, on one hand, there's an efficiency gain there. On the other hand, there's, some constraints that you have to, kind of put in place on those systems so that you at the same time preserve people's civil liberties and that sort of thing. So there's a reconciliation there, that is, profoundly important to consider as we look at, what the technology can do for us. So we're having those conversations internally and, with our development team, with our partners in law enforcement, and with the community members that they're connecting up through Fusus. So that's interesting, in technology. But then there's this whole other area outside of, kind of what we traditionally define as real-time response, which is, cameras, alert technologies, that sort of thing that help officers make informed decisions. Then there's this whole other area that I'm interested in, and I've been really exploring with our development team, which is the investigative side, right? And as I look at those workflows, traditionally in law enforcement, it's really kind of two different groups. There's the kind of the groups that are more operationally minded. They actually kind of are dispatched to the incident and they resolve and address the incident. And then there's kind of more the investigative side, and think like, one that we all understand, unfortunately, is the homicide, right? The investigation.
Yeah.
Those are
the
really
TV shows that we're all familiar with.
That's right. The first 48 and everything, right? So like, if you think about that, your mental model is that, perhaps those are two different distinctive groups, but why do they have to be? Like,
it's a great question.
Why does investigative have to be after the fact? Why couldn't we, with the wealth of data that we have available, if we could synthesize it quickly enough, could it be real time? Could I actually understand, for example, the threat that I might be walking into as I show up to a location based on, maybe criminal arrest records of the individual whose home I've been dispatched to, and as a result have a appropriate threat posture as I arrive at that location, maybe saving lives, right? Allowing officers to maybe understand what they're walking into prior to. Look, we had this in the military, right? We had intelligence, reconnaissance, right? But for the vast majority of law enforcement across the country, they don't know what they're showing up to when they arrive at a location. That they have what's in their dispatch system, and that's it. But there's this wealth of information that are in records management systems and investigative databases that could help give them insights that lend information in real time to them to make more informed real time decisions. So that's this merger of the investigative and the real time world. I just find so interesting that we're going to continue to explore.
To what extent does Fusus presently try to share that data with, between these different organizations? You guys at the very beginning stages of exploring that? Have you guys started to test doing that with any amount of success?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're referring to normally in the law enforcement, vernacular called mutual aid. And you're right. I mean, that's another silo, right? So there's the private sector, the business community, if you will, to the public sector, right? Law enforcement, if you will. Then there's also the law enforcement to law enforcement.
Right.
And you'd be surprised. I mean, so I look at like a lot of local police departments, do not currently share a whole lot of information with the sheriff's office and vice versa.
So
right?
being ignorant, what's the good reason for that?
Well, it's, some of it, I think is just kind of ensconced, ways of doing things. You've got different, org charts. We all understand that, right? I mean, who we report to and, our responsibilities to them, that sort of thing. Some of it is technology. The fact that these are different systems that the different organizations are running and they don't speak together.
Right.
That's the part where we can help.
Right. So I see that you guys have an office in London, and I was really curious to ask today how our friends across the pond have taken to the technology that you brought over there.
Yeah. So first off, we launched our office in March of this year, and, we went over to London without, really any clients. Right. So, it wasn't like the, traditional, like, let's go find a client, sign a contract, and then we'll open an office. I think we were leaning in, fortune favors the brave, so to speak. And so we decided, let's make an investment. And we kind of understood intuitively that in order to take what we had demonstrated in the U.S. is now become kind of a movement, right? Real-time crime centers in the U.S., since 2019, when we kicked this endeavor off, have just like rapidly accelerated in the U.S. I mean, there's even National Real-Time Crime Center Association now. There's annual events. I'm actually attending one in Canada. So now Canada's picked up the ball and they're running with it. Their agencies are looking at it. We have our first clients internationally down in the Caribbean. So, I mean, this side of the pond, so to speak, gets it, right? And they're leaning in on real-time crime. They are. Yeah. But back to your question, we always knew that going to the UK was going to be somewhat, preemptive. And It's interesting because I've learned a couple things being in the UK. So cameras in the United States are primarily managed by the police department. I mean, cities have their own camera assets, but police departments have their own camera assets as well. And so when we try to connect up, for example, cameras from a police department, it's easy if the person you're doing the connecting on behalf actually owns the cameras that you're connecting, right? It's a little different in the UK, where they have something called local authorities, which are kind of like their version of like little municipal kind of governments who actually own the cameras. So I may be a police department in a local authority area, but I may not have any cameras under management. So that conversation is a little different because we've got to get consent from both the police department and the local authority to connect up that asset. And so the buy-in process is a little different. And I think obviously there's a little bit of what is a real-time crime center, and then even the word center is spelled differently, right? It's RE in the UK versus ER. So I mean, we're learning a lot of this nuance, but the good news is I think we've got our first agency who is about to close in the UK, and we've probably got 4 or 5 behind them that are moving in that direction. So we're definitely making headway, but it was definitely a learning process, a lot of education to get us there. But we're proud, like we did in the US, to really be on the forefront of that movement.
That's awesome. So one of the things you talked about a little bit ago was AI, and I'm happy you brought it up. I'm just curious, what are some of the benefits that you see of AI being in law enforcement technology, and then what are some of the potential drawbacks? Because, I mean, you pretty much elaborated on this, but a lot of different organizations and industries are trying to use AI and figuring it out. When you really talk about people's safety, it would seem like there's a lot of different avenues that you've got to walk with certain amounts of trepidation. And so what do you make of how to approach that and how to integrate?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, just mathematically, I look at a lot of challenges in terms of the quantitative component. So like an average camera, right? If it's running at 30 frames a second, there's 3,600 seconds in an hour. So you're almost at, 100,000 frames in an hour, right? From one camera. Now multiply that times 24 hours in a day, and you're in the, millions of frames of data from one camera. So now magnify that times 1,000 cameras across a jurisdiction. It would take a team of hundreds of people to do what an artificial intelligence enabled engine can find in seconds.
Right.
So if I'm looking for something as trivial as a person with a red shirt on and black pants, right? I put that query field into a system. I've got results in seconds. And when seconds mean lives, that matters. So that's intuitively, I think, the way that we can kind of get our head wrapped around the benefit of AI.
Efficiency.
The efficiencies. Now, the hazards are, obviously concerns around profiling, right? Mm-hmm. So when you get into this concept of now we're uploading everybody into a system that just arbitrarily tracks their movements at all times. It's not a kind of system that Fusus wants to build. Right. So that's where we draw the line and say, all right, look, there's what I would consider, and I think many who are in this movement with us towards better community-led policing tools, to be kind of efficiency gaining tools. And then there's tools that can be, potentially a slippery slope towards infringement on people's civil liberties. And so that's where I would draw that line. Again, I'm not judge or jury on that. It varies jurisdiction to jurisdiction of how they use technology. But, at Fusus, we've drawn a really clear line, which is let's figure out how to make things more efficient. And then in doing so, help communities not only address crime and resolve crime more quickly, but also heal, right? Because part of the healing process from especially tragic incidents like homicides or active shooters is how quickly you can resolve them, right? And we feel like we can be a tool for resolution, especially expeditious resolution.
Well, I appreciate that. So I like this next section of how we do this because we really get into storytelling. And when I think of what you guys just did today, what I'd love to hear is just an example of maybe one of the first obstacles that you and your partners encountered when you were starting this dream just under 5 years ago, a little over 4, and how you guys overcame it.
We know with any small company, you got to have funding. And so when myself and my co-founder, a gentleman named Anthony Baldoni, when we started the company, we had a concept, right? And, you know, you kind of envision Shark Tank, right? Like you're pitching an idea to people who may or may not be interested, but you know, in the back of your head, not only is your business at stake, but basically your financial well-being, your ability to put food on your table. So there's a lot at stake. It's a high risk gambit. And it's not for the faint at heart, but I can tell you, having gone through it now, there are some sound principles that, you know, I'm really excited to help future entrepreneurs, you know, learn from, and build upon. And that's always the first challenges, right? Is like, you can't make money without having money. You got to have a solid financial foundation to actually do anything. And then the second thing, obviously, is you've got to have clients. You got to have adoption. You know, I spent a fair amount of time in the beginning of the company just spending time with clients and listening. And that's the key, because, you know, the old adage, you know, companies oftentimes engineer solutions for problems that don't exist.
Yes.
That's the hazard of, once you have money, you know, the natural inclination is build. Like, we got to get something out. We got to start selling it.
Something to sell. Yeah.
And, you know, and I was very open and direct and honest with our investors. I said, you know, I need at least 6 months to build a viable solution. You need to give me some latitude to really go out and listen to customers and build something. That was my first, you know, misforecast. It actually took us 11 months to build. So I didn't always get it right.
Yeah. But you knew you needed time. And it sounds like the obstacle that you're talking about is patience.
It is. And I also know that you only have one chance to make a first impression. So I'd rather take the extra 5 months and get it done right and actually have something that works than rush something to market and then hear a resounding, yeah, it's not going to work. And then there's a little bit of, I don't know, luck. I mean, the reality is timing matters, right? I mean, there's an element of,
unfortunately, it does.
You gotta lean in. You gotta take chances. And, you know, one of the cities that we started really exploring, you know, our earliest developments with was the city of Minneapolis. We launched version 1 of our real-time crime center solution a month before the George Floyd incident in the city of Minneapolis.
Oh, wow.
And as tragic as that circumstance was, it was also transformative for law enforcement, not just the city of Minneapolis, but as a whole. It brought to bear a whole new perspective on public-private partnerships and the importance thereof. And at the crux of this was this little-known software company in the city of Minneapolis that could bridge community-owned assets with law enforcement assets to do a light touch, intelligence-informed style policing, as opposed to just, you know, putting cops out on corners, right? Which carried with it a whole host of other concerns, right? You know, the optics of officers standing around on the street during protests and that sort of thing, which candidly neither the community nor Minneapolis Police Department wanted, right? That wasn't really where they wanted to be. It was just standing, you know, they wanted to actually respond to incidents. But in order to do that, you kind of had to know where those incidents were. And so as we built these bridges within the community, we saw, wow, there's an appetite for this across the country, especially in the face of, you know, budget shortfalls and hiring issues, retention issues. It just was really this solution that could just ameliorate so many different things that were popping up all at once. And so, you know, as I say, you know, some of this was just opportunistic. It was timing. You know, it was a lot of dedicated people, and I think the market was timed right for what we were building.
What was that interaction like with the city of Minneapolis, like right before that happened, and then while it was happening? Like, what was memorable about that for you? Well,
I can tell you that they wanted as much as anybody in the community to keep the community safe and to keep businesses open and to keep people feeling like they were at one with the community. I mean, they wanted that spirit of cohesiveness, and it obviously it dissipated very quickly when that incident occurred. And so I remember, the prior chief, wanting to go so far as to share, real-time dispatch related information so that people in the community would understand what the response times were like, within the community. I mean, there were a lot of initiatives to like extend an olive branch and want to let the community know, hey, first off, we get it. We understand your frustration. Second, we're not foregoing our responsibility to keep you safe. And third, we want to do everything we can to quell the dissension that's obviously, kind of growing throughout the community. And so I would say that, Fusus played a part in being a resource for them to quell those concerns. But as much as we know about Minneapolis, I mean, they're not alone in that. There are a lot of other cities around the country that are dealing with challenges. They may not be as, global in terms of, media awareness, but if I'm a local citizen and I'm seeing the homicide rate go up, and I'm seeing, smash and grabs at local, retailers and businesses shuttering as a result of that. And as a result of that, tax revenue, and then very much needed social services having to, take budget cuts, right? Like, people are feeling that, right? They understand the downstream impact of lack of security. And so I look at this across the country and I see there's only an appetite, and that appetite is growing to figure out smart ways to work with law enforcement to build those bridges.
So over your professional career, taking into account Fusus and your time in the Navy and everything in between, what milestone stands out that you're particularly proud of? How did you work towards that, and what impact did it have on you personally and also the organization you were working for at the time?
The military is not perfect.
Right.
But one thing that it does for a young man or young lady is it teaches them that they're part of something bigger, that you are more effective together than you are as a individual, that you can achieve more, you can go faster, you can go further. And that's probably the lesson that I have carried closest and dearest to myself throughout my professional career. And candidly, that's what keeps employees at the company. Mm-hmm. We lost 0 engineers last year, 0. In like a super competitive market where, technology companies are trying their best to pull the top players from other technology companies so that they have that competitive edge. We lost 0 of our developers, and we're growing good sized organization. That says something about the culture of teamwork at our company that I think yields people's desire to stay. I mean, compensation matters, right? Mm-hmm. We try to do, things like unlimited PTO, and we try to, make sure that employees have, snacks in the kitchen. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, do you feel like you're a part of something? Do you believe in the mission? Do you believe in your teammates? That's a universal, theory that I think applies across the military to private sector spectrum. And it's part of our secret sauce. I mean, I'll be honest with you. And we're not just hiring veterans and former law enforcement. We're hiring a lot of people that are fresh out of engineering schools. We hired somebody who worked at a local restaurant who had aspirations to get into software development. And he just was a hard worker, and we could see it all over his resume. He was doing a software boot camp at night. We offered him a paid internship, matched his salary on at the restaurant, and he's now one of our top engineers. Doing great things for our company, doing great things for our customers, and I think that's a maturation in about 2 years of somebody who just a couple of years ago was not even in the technology space, and that's because we saw work ethic. He demonstrated an ability to be a member of the team and to be a valued member of the team, a trusted member. And we have, taken folks like that. And I'm really proud of this as we've elevated them. And,
those sound like people that want to be there.
That's hugely important. That's so much more important than your tech or, your business model. The people, if you have hardworking, brilliant people, you can move mountains. And the Fusus folks have demonstrated that.
That sounds like, that milestone being a lot of the virtues you learned during your time in the U.S. Navy, really proving themselves to be valuable in your fast growing company right now. Yeah. So the next part of this is really going to Chris and a lot more about Chris and going a little bit even beyond storytelling. For you in your role and in your day now as a dad and as a CEO and a leader, what makes a great day and what makes a bad day a bad day?
Well, I will tell you this, nobody does what I do without having like an awesome teammate. My wife, she makes things possible.
Shout out to her.
Yeah.
Shout out to her.
Rachel. I mean, if you get a chance to listen to this, I know you're busy with so many other things these days, but I couldn't do it without you. And, that's the truth is you got to feel like things at home are in good shape if you're going to focus while you're in the office. And so she's made that possible for me. Folks like Anthony, who I started this company with, or Scott Howland, who, left California Highway Patrol after many years of dedicated service as their CIO and retired as a deputy chief, who, I reached out to and said, hey, we just take a leap of faith. We're a new company. We could use your, support. He's now our chief product officer, and he's built, the most innovative, fastest growing product in this space. Tony Robinson, who is our CTO, who leads that brilliant team of engineers who are so dedicated to the company and are doing new releases like just about every week. You look at our VPs, our directors, our employees, folks that are, in some cases fresh out of college. This is their first gig, and they're doing amazing things. And, they're self-directed in so many cases. I mean, if you look at those things, those are the things that make my job so exciting and make what I do such a source of joy and inspiration. I get up every morning and I'm like ready to tackle the day. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's those people that make that possible. My children, they're also a source of inspiration. They keep us busy.
They make us think differently.
They make us think differently, and they up that ante, certainly in terms
they're
of
our toughest negotiators.
They are. And it kind of makes, when you make money and it kind of goes to the next generation, and you see what they're able to do with it, and you kind of feel good looking at them saying, all right, the bottom line makes sense. Because prior to that, it's, you accumulate wealth. What do you do with it? It just sits in an account but when you can help your offspring do some amazing things, education and sports, that feels great. So those are the things that inspire me. But I got to tell you, as I see cities around now the globe pop up with what we're doing, and actually not only just adopt it, but actually be the ardent supporters of it. You see now mayors standing up and saying, you should look at the Fusus Connect program, and this matters to us as a community, and this is why. When I see chiefs saying, we're going to do this because it matters. When I see sheriffs campaigning, I think we've kind of crossed the chasm a little bit. It's no longer just, this is cool tech. Like, this is a straight up movement. And that is what I find so fulfilling, because we kind of had the inclination a couple years ago that we could do this, but now to actually see it come to fruition, it's a totally different, and now I'm part of this as much as, our employees this thing's taking a life of its own. It ain't stopping because of Chris Lindenau. This thing is going to continue to grow, and that's a huge source of pride.
Yeah. And so it sounds like what makes a great day, just all encompassing everything you said, is really seeing the talent in your team shine, and your clients and customers not just appreciating what you do, but advocating for you.
Yeah.
Because there's a sense of validation there. What makes the bad day the bad day? What's the challenge? What's the struggle? What rips at your heart? What does that look like?
Well, you develop partnerships with these agencies. So when you hear that they've lost one of their officers, that always hits home.
Yeah.
And, as a solution-minded person, I'm always looking at ways to prevent that. Right. So you start to look at things a little different from almost the perspective of ownership of the problem. Like, it can be solved, and the solution's there. You just got to figure it out, Chris Lindenau. You got to get your team together. You got to figure it out. So I take a level of ownership now on these tragic circumstances that happen, especially with, lost officers in the line of duty, at a level that obviously prior to being a solution provider in this public safety world, that I had the sensitivity towards, right?
Yeah.
You kind of hear about it on the media. It's different than when it's like, you're part of the team that's supposed to prevent these things from happening, that ups the ante a little bit in terms of, all right, like let's circle the wagons. Let's figure this thing out.
Yeah. I would say that challenge would definitely be unique to your industry, and I could see how that would be in a lot of ways tough to deal with, but in some ways, as best as you can, use it to motivate you to continue to do great things.
Well, and I also think the other side of that coin applies too, right? I mean, if we can prevent, citizens from losing their life, that's a huge part too. And it can be not just in, response to committing a crime, but it can be, in vehicular incidents or, abductions. I mean, these are all circumstances we think about, why can't we have such a vast awareness in real time that when a child gets abducted, they don't make it out of their jurisdiction, right? Yeah. We can solve that. That's a solvable challenge. Mm-hmm. I would submit to you at some point, without Chris or with Chris and Fusus, it'll get solved. Some innovator out there is going to solve it. Just so happens that we're going to lean in on that. We're going to try to solve it, right? Those are circumstances that I think we can help communities with today. And it's really about taking the data that's already out there and making it available in real time in an actionable way. Mm-hmm. We've already demonstrated
efficiency again,
right? Yeah. I mean, you look at, there was the the Midtown shooter incident a few months back in Atlanta, right? That was a prime example of Fusus being used to allow agencies, multiple agencies, the Atlanta Police Department and Cobb County, to respond in real time, and they were able to apprehend the suspect within hours of the incident. And the chief from Cobb actually went out, on a press conference and said, prior to having this technology available, we might still be looking for this individual. Obviously, shout out to the brave officers and their hard work. They did tremendous work, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. But they leaned on tech. So why can't we leverage that same concept to deal with things like, as I mentioned, the missing child, the Amber Alert, and I think we can.
Yeah. So, what industry or what role besides law enforcement technology would you like to attempt?
Well, I find myself, and I don't know if it's the entrepreneurial flair, but I find myself looking at problems and saying, how would I solve that? Like, very, maybe too much. So it's kind of, it's a little bit kind of on my mind more than it probably should be. But I look at everyday challenges and I say, wow, that would be a cool one to solve. So there's no limit to the number of opportunities. I mean, if you think about the things that are uncomfortable or the things that you wish you didn't have to do, or there's low return on investment and you just kind of have to go, those are prime opportunities for creating a solution. And if the solution is something
like a solution finder.
Yeah, that's right. So if you have a solution and you think other people need that solution, well, now you just created a business.
Yeah.
And so I spend a lot of time doing that, with folks like yourself.
Sounds like a fun hobby.
I mean,
what's
look,
a problem? What's something that doesn't exist yet? What's a different way of doing something?
What's the simplest way that you can solve the most complex problems, right? Mm-hmm. Like those are going to be the most impactful businesses, right?
Well said. Mm-hmm. So this last question comes from a TV show you may or may not have seen before. It's called Inside the Actors Guild. And he ends the show. And when we started doing this podcast as an office, I always thought this would be a great way to end a show. The question is if heaven exists, what do you hope God says when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You left an impact. You made an impact on society that will extend well beyond your mortal time on this planet.
That would be a great thing to hear. Mm-hmm. Chris, again, thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun hearing about your exciting company and just the crazy fast industry that you're in and how it's grown in different ways to solve things. And congrats again on making Georgia's fastest growing company just today. That's incredible.
Well, thanks for having me on, Danny.
If somebody listening to this wanted to get in touch with you, what would be the best way for them to try?
Yeah, it's really simple. Fusus, FUSUS.com. Our contact information is on the website. Everything you need to get, connected. And my name's Chris. And so, let the team know when you reach out, you want to chat with me. I'm a pretty easy guy to get in touch with. So we'd love to contact you or speak with you if you want to speak.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And everybody listening, thank you for your time. We will see you again next time on Executive Perspective.
Thank you for joining us on Executive Perspective. This show is brought to you by Cressa, the world's largest occupier-centric commercial real estate firm offering unbiased, conflict-free advice. For more information, go to cressa.com.